of such of my masculine physique and how much I love this country that I'm sort of like a Hulk Hogan-esque character, a real American. Every Hulk Hogan needs his Iron Sheik. And so I would like to bring on a good friend of mine who is a Biden voter onto the Trump rally here. And he's going to talk about whatever he wants. I do have a couple serious things to talk about, but I assume he's here to grovel and complain about how they're about to lose the election. But my good friend Dylan Burns from Dylan Burns TV on Twitch. So welcome, Dylan. Thank you for being here. Oh, look at that.
Here. I'm very happy to be here with the flyover state people.
Thank you.
I'm very happy to be here. I'm here to bring knowledge to, I'm a liberal elitist, so I'm here to bring knowledge to the flyover state people. Don't get too close to me, okay? Don't get too close. But I'm here to bring knowledge, respect. I have many pollsters with me. I have many great intellectual institutions with me. The media's with me. I mean, the advantage is truly in my court today. I mean, you guys should just give up now.
Well, my question is, do you think you'll get crap from your ivory tower elites for platforming so many racists like us?
Look, all I know is I make the Republicans make me money, and I love that. I love it when Republicans make me money. See, my values stop when the money starts getting up there. So, for all the future people who might possibly vote for me in an election, just remember I will sell my soul for any penny, dime, or whatever. It's quite simple for me.
Well, I see, as any good socialist, you're wearing a crown of gold that no doubt was off the backs of the workers you claim to represent. Do you see your prediction that your socialist wave, do you see it actually being successful come tomorrow?
Look, I mean, I could get my Communist Party USA card out. I mean, as every good liberal has. I mean, it actually came with the Biden merch that I have, it came with it. So it's actually, if you look here, I have my wonderful Biden merch. I mean, it was great. It's wonderful. I mean, it came with Communist Party USA, an Antifa Molotov making instruction manual. It was wonderful.
Well, that's fantastic. And I also like that, as clearly a Bernie supporter, that you capitulated and went with the corporatist Biden and are going with him as well. Have you and Bernie collaborated on how you've sold yourselves out to go with a corporatist like Biden?
Well, simply, as we all know, Bernie's too moderate for me, so I had to go for the radical like Joe Biden. Way too moderate. I mean, honestly, he's center-right. He was the Republican of the 1970s, Bernie Sanders. Joe Biden's the Democrat of the 21st century. He's going to bring a Maoist anarcho-communist revolution, and that's why I jumped on board with the Joe Biden campaign. And I just needed to be more radical.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the name Joe, because I thought from hearing you previously that actually you were voting for Hunter Biden.
Yes, I'm going to be. I did a write-in for Hunter Biden. After I heard all of the activities he was involved in, I just had to jump on board with Hunter Biden. Actually, what I'm thinking, though, is 2 terms of Biden, then Hunter for another 2 terms. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and I think that we could probably work that out, though. I'm sure that Hunter wouldn't want the actual, monetary wages that he gets. He gets more than enough of that from China and Burisma. But maybe we as Americans could donate crack cocaine to Hunter, and that would be a good, incentive for him to be a great president, I'm sure.
I mean, he really doesn't know how to pull out of that type of lifestyle. I mean, honestly, I hope he recovers dutifully. I know we all here want him to recover. I mean, Trump has obviously been much better at pulling out of like third world countries that we've been involved in wars for so long. I mean, he's pulling out of Iraq, he's pulling out of Afghanistan, pulled out of Syria. Great thing. I mean, I just wish he pulled out of Stormy Daniels as well.
Well, I don't know that pulling out would be Hunter Biden's strong suit. How many kids does he have that are court ordered to, pay for them? I've lost track.
Yeah, I also hate when politicians like women. Yes.
Yeah, it really, I know that's something on the left that probably aggravates a lot of people. So, let me ask you this. Are you looking forward to going to the polls and using violence and intimidation to keep Trump supporters from actually voting?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think, surrounding a bus with a bunch of trucks and flags is petty stuff. I think blocking off highways, I mean, I don't know why the Republicans are using our tactics now. We should sue them for copyright infringement. Personally, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to do some Wile E. Coyote. I'm going to be, swinging the sign around and pointing it in the other direction. I actually have a ticket to go down to Texas tomorrow to do that, and I'm going to be doing it personally with the Beto O'Rourke.
Oh, with Beto.
Yes.
Good. Then if anyone does arm themselves to be able to vote, I'm sure Beto will be there immediately to take away that weapon.
Of course. I mean, I'm coming for every gun, basically. I'm coming for AR-15s. 1911s, 1812s, 1942s, 99, 47, 89s. I'm coming from water guns, marshmallow guns, really any gun you could possibly think of.
Carlos is telling me to tell you you're out of focus, which I would have said earlier, but I didn't know if that would offend liberal sensibilities, and that was somehow akin to me, misgendering you or something. So,
well, it's just I think it's simply you just can't see the bigger picture here. I mean, I think my hope is that the blurriness will confuse people enough so that when they go to vote, they're still rubbing their eyes, so that maybe they'll fill in Biden.
Yeah, well, more liberal tactics can't show the clear truth and transparency. You have to fuzzy up the picture to actually try to win.
Of course.
So, Dylan, we can keep going. I'm actually having a lot of fun with this, but thank you so much for joining. You can keep joking around if you want, but just for everyone, just so you know how I know Dylan. Dylan is someone who streams on Twitch, who is on the left. I think that's fair to say. And I think he's the best moderator I've seen in debates.
No
he has 4-on-4 panel debates. And I've never once seen him leave his actual personal opinions affect how he moderates a debate. So I thought it was important to have someone on to give another perspective that I knew would give a good faith perspective. I didn't expect the LARPing as much, but I guess I'm as guilty as well, and it's helping keep it. Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, him showing his true colors as much. I thought he would be in his normal faux moderate character, but I'm glad to see that he came this way. But thanks so much for joining, Dylan. How are you doing today?
I'm very happy to be here. I'm doing okay. I just had a really good stream today. I did election coverage, and I had the most natural viewership I've ever had on Twitch, just from natural, no raids, no nothing, which is great. I had over 330 live viewers, which was great for me. Seeing that, I think political Twitch is going to have a real place on Twitch after the election. I think a lot of people think it's going to die out. I disagree with them. I think it's found a permanent spot there.
Well, let me say this. I know you're on the left, but if I'm trying to convince people on the right to join Twitch, can you tell them the importance? Like, if political Twitch becomes something big, if you were advocating for someone on the right, wouldn't you tell them that it's a strategic mistake to give up that platform to just one side of the ledger?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Republican, I mean, when you really think about it, Twitch is like a treasure trove of content, really. Think about it. It's where all the lefties are. It's where all the bigger lefty online content creators are now. If you want to go online and battle with other ideas and, like, get yourself, I mean, by just saying you're a Republican, you can get on many different shows. I remember Sushi, for example, was at 800 followers, and he was able to get on the Raj Royale. And a lot of that was due to the fact that they didn't have any conservative voices to bring on. So there's a big gap when it comes to conservative voices on the platform, and I know I personally would love to bring on different voices of different opinions on my show. And I would also say that at the end of the day, if they don't do that, Twitch is going to continue to grow, and
right.
If you don't go there, then the lefties will just continue to dominate the space. I mean, just because you come on doesn't mean necessarily you will as well. It just means they'll have some resistance.
What is unsaid and what is unseen counts for nothing. Rule number 6, 48 laws of power.
Yeah, and by the way, I apologize for not introducing you. Dylan, this is my co-host on my radio show, Carlos Saldivia. So, just so you can each introduce yourselves to each other.
Great pleasure, Dylan. I watch you when Robert goes on these debates, and you had me at the American flag behind you.
I thank you very much. I appreciate that. I think the left wing should do a lot more with the American flag, because I think a lot of our values are actually patriotic. I know a lot of people have tried to twist them like, oh, the lefties are communists or socialists or they're evil, like people who want to tear down American values. But I personally have always thought that providing for your fellow man is an American value. Making sure everybody has decent opportunities is an American value. Our nation was built on some of these fundamental values. And so I always thought that a lot of the values that I try to fight for every day are American values, even if some people would disagree with that.
Well, see, I totally agree with you there. Now, where we will disagree is, and I've said this for a long, long time, there are plenty of people that have varying political ideologies, even almost disparate of each other, completely opposite. But I think most people, if you could really ask, what does your ideal world look like? What are you trying to get to? I think most people basically agree. The question is, how do we get to that ideal world? I happen to think that socialism, I believe in a mixed economy with limited socialism, like social safety nets. But I happen to think it's the wrong way. You probably lean more towards socialism than thinks capitalism is the wrong way. But I don't think that that makes either of us immoral people that want to see people, struggle or suffer or anything like that.
I've always described myself. Not a lot of people don't know who this person is. People who are really into politics might do. I always considered myself a Huey Long Democrat. I've always considered myself a Huey Long Democrat.
Yeah.
I mean,
please
Huey
go
Long
ahead.
famously said that he believed that the Share Our Wealth program was actually one of America's strongest defenses against communism, because making sure that everybody has their basic needs attended to is one of the best ways to stop them from going to radicalized parties.
Could you tell our audience, you've worked in political campaigns
Yes.
and in local politics. Can you kind of explain a little of that?
Yes, I've worked for the Michaela Wilkes congressional campaign as their foreign policy advisor. I believe, and it's been told to me, that I might be the youngest foreign policy advisor in United States history. I've also
And how old are you? How old were you when you?
I was 18.
Okay.
I was foreign policy advisor to State Senator Jill Carter. I ran the Patrick Wilhan, who's my current mayor's election campaign for mayor. So since he's the current mayor, I think I did a decent job. I worked on Mike Revell's presidential campaign as well as the state director and deputy regional director. I've done some union organizing. I've done some stuff with Our Revolution, and I work for the 21st Century Democrats political PAC.
Awesome. That's awesome. And one of the things I've heard you talk about, that this was one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on. You've been a strong advocate for increasing young people's participation,
Yes.
not just on like discussing politics, but actually trying to advocate for changes like legislatively to encourage more young people and to make it easier for young people to get involved in the political process. Can you talk about that a little?
Sure. I actually tried to run for city council when I turned 18 years old. I have lived in the city longer than most of the people who are on the city council, just by living here for most of my life. Because
We're second in Maryland, right?
Yes, I live in Maryland. Yes, yes, I live in Maryland. I live in Prince George's County, specifically the city of College Park. So I was going to run for city council, and I was 18 years of age, which according to the city charter, being 18, I should be allowed to vote. Run. And the problem was that I had to be registered to vote 1 year before election day, meaning that I would have had to register to vote when I was 17 to run when I was 18, meaning I would have had to know 1 year in advance that I needed to register to vote and that I would register to vote at age 17, which it's always when you turn 18, you register to vote because you're old enough to vote now. That's how it always worked. So I try to run, and they say that, well, Dylan, this was an oversight in the city charter. We're really sorry, but according to the city charter, you can't run for city council. And the reason why is that because I didn't register that 1 year before, they had no proof that I've lived here long enough, even though I've lived in the city longer than the majority of the people on the city council. I said I could bring mail in. I could show you pictures of me as a baby walking down the street on my street. I could show you many different things. I could show you my mother pregnant with me in the house. We've lived in the house for a very long time, but that was not enough. And so I coordinated with the city council, and right now, after 1 year of hard work, it looks like we're going to change the city charter to make it so 18-year-olds will be able to run in future elections. That won't help me, because I'm already older, so
Right.
I can run whenever I want to. But I wanted to make sure that the people following me would be encouraged to run in city council runs, because there's already low youth participation in politics. But when it gets to local politics, it's even worse.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely amazing. And I mean that in all sincerity. When I was 18, I was more concerned with someone to buy me booze. And so to see you taking an active interest that young, I just think that's amazing. And I think that it'll benefit a lot of people that come after you that have every right and every bit of knowledge to be involved in politics as much as people that are, 3-4 times their age. So I honestly commend you for that. I think it's fantastic. I wanted to ask you, we were talking about kind of, right-wingers coming on Twitch. You host panel debates you call the Hippy Dippy podcast that's every Friday. Can you talk a little about how you came up with the idea to have these 4-on-4 debates and maybe some of the challenges that go along with trying to get those panels filled out on a weekly basis?
So I host the Hippy Hippy Roundtable every Friday, and I've been doing it for months now. I've only missed one Friday, and that was after I had a personal dilemma I had to deal with. But every single other Friday, I've been consistent in getting this out, and it's usually 4v4 or 3v3. Sometimes more leaning towards 4v4. So I have to get 8 people, at 4 of which disagree with the other 4, into a room so they can talk about 3 issues over the span of 3 hours and a half. Obviously, that is a difficult mission when I have 1 week to organize it, and I want to make sure that everybody has time to research. I usually make sure people have 5 to 7 days to research a topic before we have the debate, because I don't like dropping a topic like last second or the day before. I want to make sure people are able to take their due diligence to do this. So it's quite difficult because there's a lot of last second cancellations. There's a lot of people who show interest, but then midway through the week they drop it, or a lot of times the main person will cancel and then the replacement will cancel as well. And it's very difficult to consistently get this out there, and it's also difficult to convince a lot of people that it's worth their time to engage in a panel show of this manner, because, you know, a lot of people don't think minds can be changed in this manner.
Well, so first, let me just say, I at one point was scheduled for your show, then dropped out, and then was the last minute replacement. So I might be the only one who dropped out and was the replacement. But I was going to ask you, it's funny you mentioned about minds being changed, just out of curiosity. Now, as the moderator, you're never kind of giving your perspective on things. But just by listening, has there been a topic that you were surprised that, you know, maybe you went in thinking strongly one way, and then you were like, hey, these are some good arguments the other way?
That's a difficult question. I will say that I've probably become more moderate on gun control. That would probably be something that that has happened to me. Besides that, I would say gun control is the biggest one. Definitely gun control. Yeah, I'm more moderate on gun control, but that's also as I've gotten older, I've become more moderate on it.
And so let me ask you the opposite question. By listening sometimes, do you come up with arguments in your head that you're like, and that ends up buttressing your position so that you're a more effective advocate for that position later?
Yes, and anytime I hear anybody else on Twitch talk about foreign policy, I immediately just be like, man, I don't want to say a lot. Just a lot of people. I feel like more people need to be able to come into a conversation saying, I don't know a lot about this, so I'm just going to say what I think. But a lot of people come in and they, on every topic, they feel like they got to swing. Right. I remember a while ago I was watching a panel show, and somebody said the statement. It was right after the Soleimani killing, and somebody said the statement, well, Iran can't do shit to us. And I was thinking to myself, well, the reason why we're conducting proxy wars against them is because they can do shit to us.
They did stuff to us.
Yeah, I mean, they've killed Soleimani, famously, who was the person of the topic, killed over 600 American troops in Iraq. There's also the famous example of right after they ended up sending missiles and attacking American troops, and American soldiers did later get killed afterwards by Iranian proxies in Iraq by sending missiles over. So obviously, dead Americans is something to me.
Right. I'll give you a funny story. I debated in college, and I judged debates after I was done with my eligibility. I judged a debate once where there was a debate about Vietnam and possible naval cruisers and stuff being off the coast of Vietnam. And the other team stood up and said, Vietnam's landlocked. And the other team was just like, oh. And that was it. So, like, as a judge, I was like, okay, that argument's conceded. But I mean, it's just funny to see this. And these weren't dumb people. It was just there's a million arguments going on in the context of a debate, and that just someone like didn't have time to think about it. Clearly was like, oh, okay. So yeah, I know. I will say this. I would be happy, and maybe we'll do a little foreign policy discussion here before you go. But I will fully admit, and I think in my conversations with you, particularly in Syria, I've admitted that you were far more well researched than me. So I hope that that's true, or that comes across as I'm being genuine about it. But I still have reasons for my position. I don't think necessarily that you have to know everything about it, you know, read volumes to have a credible opinion. But what you need to do is understand that if someone's talking about a specific situation and it's clear that they're more well-read than you, you don't have to necessarily assume that they're 100% right, but you should have a little dignity to not make a fool of yourself and say, well, let me go look at that and make sure that's right for another date. Because I agree with you. And I've been guilty of that. I've made a fool of myself spouting off, and then I was just absolutely wrong. So I'm sure as someone who really specializes in foreign policy, you hear an awful lot that you're like, jeez.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, it's happened so much now when I'm on Twitch that there's a lot of times someone will say something that's like, and it'll be a number, it'll be a statistic, and I've seen the statistic misrepresented so many times, and I see them doing it that I don't even need to look at it, and I can tell them exactly how it's been misrepresented, exactly how it's wrong, exactly how it's this. One great example is one of the famous things that I see a lot from more isolationist people is they bring up Madison Albright when she talked about the sanctions on Iraq and how it killed over 500,000 children, and it's like, and then she says when asked about it, like, it's a price I'm willing to pay, and you're like, oh my gosh, Bill Clinton's administration's fine with killing over 500,000 Iraqi children. It's disastrous. But then you look after the fact, and it's like, UNICEF just took Saddam's word on this data. Also, the British medical reports of Iraq after the fact have shown that the childhood fatality of Iraq was actually the same during the sanctions as the rest of the region. And then after learning this over time by me making mistakes sometimes, I remember once I talked to someone who was a North Korea supporter who brought that up, and I was like, no, I know you're wrong. This is stuff I've heard from, like, this is just complete conspiracy theory. This is literally just Saddam Hussein propaganda.
Right. Just curious, I've never asked you this. What was it about foreign policy that drove you to that being the thing that you really like to focus on?
So, me getting into politics was completely unrelated to foreign policy. So it is an interesting story where I followed the Syrian civil war day by day by using live map technology, basically just watching troop movements and finding it very interesting. And slowly I grew a slight interest in it, and I started to learn more about it. And I remember I talked to a government teacher, someone who's supposed to teach me about government, and I was expressing how I didn't like a certain candidate for office stance on a foreign policy issue, that I thought it was way too hawky for me, that they wanted to bomb this and that, and they were okay with this bombing operation. And they said to me, well, at the end of the day, no one cares about foreign policy, so I'm voting for them anyway. And I got that from a government teacher, basically just completely throwing that out of the way, even though we have the most military bases around the world, we have the most powerful military in the world, we spend the most on the military than any other country in the world, we have a huge foreign policy apparatus, we send so much money to the Pentagon, and it's not important to a government teacher. And all polling seems to suggest, though, the vast majority of Americans view foreign policy in the same way, even though at the end of the day, foreign policy should be seen as a kitchen counter issue, because trade, foreign relations, this all affects us. It can affect oil prices and how much it costs to fill up your car. It can affect the industries that we have at home, and when it comes to imports and tariffs and trade with the world, it can affect whether young men and women die overseas. Of course it has an impact at home, and I think maybe having a family member come back in a casket is something that I would say is very kitchen table to me.
All right, so we've been nice to each other. We've been agreeing on some stuff. I think we should get a little contentious. So give me your story, why people should go out and vote for Joe Biden's foreign policy over Donald Trump's foreign policy.
I personally think that Donald Trump, I think a lot of people chose him because he was the outsider candidate, that they were angry against the establishment, the establishment like the Obama, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden establishment. And I understand that rage, but what also happened when they voted for Donald Trump is they voted for somebody who didn't really have much, if any, foreign policy experience. And through following his work overseas and the different things he has done in office, I think that has become self-evident. The lack of ambassadorships, how he still, 4 years into his term, hasn't filled up all the ambassadorships. The fact that when he went, his decision on the Syrian Kurds was probably the most disastrous decision of his administration. I think that is the number one worst thing Donald Trump has done in office. And that was that was something that was very personal to me, as the Syrian civil war was the thing that got me into foreign policy by following the SDF, YPJ's troop movements. And I think that action was, I would call it, treacherous in nature, by feeding the northeastern Syrian SDF to Erdogan, and his caving to an authoritarian like Erdogan on this issue, when he says, like, I'm going to talk big on NATO, I'm going to pressure NATO, but then the one nation in NATO that has been the most rambunctious, the most authoritarian, the most out of line, he caves to. At the same time, he talks about holding NATO accountable. I think that his deals in North Korea have failed. I think he took large risks and gave a dictatorship a credibility. I don't want to bomb rush you, but I would also bring up the fact of his statements, which things he have advocated for that would amount to also war crimes, like killing the families of terrorists or bombing Iranian cultural site, and he had a list. So he didn't only just say it offhand; he had a number of how many Iranian cultural sites he wanted to bomb. And I would another big thing for me would also be his continued support for the war in Yemen, even though it is now bipartisanly opposed by a majority of the House and Senate, and he vetoed legislation to end our support for the war in Yemen, even after the Jamal Khashoggi killing.
Okay, so if you don't mind, if I could push back on some of it.
Sure.
First off, with North Korea, right? One of the things that always I question first, if you look, I think Barack Obama was quite clear that North Korea was his biggest concern foreign policy wise at the time when he was leaving office. And the criticism of Trump was he was such a maniac that he was going to provoke some sort of conflict with North Korea. Not only do we not see that conflict, things seem to be more stable, in my opinion, right now with North Korea, as far as it seems like I'm not saying we're in the clear or anything like that, and North Korea is always provoking, but it seemed like tensions were higher during the Obama administration than during right now. And the main criticism I seem to hear is, well, he legitimized the regime by sitting down and talking with them. But why isn't that same sort of criticism applied to the biggest state sponsor of terrorism, allegedly Iran, when Barack Obama was sending pallets of cash to them? It seems like merely sitting down and meeting with a dictatorial or a corrupt leader that's engaged in bad behavior is far less of an egregious step than actually giving money to that leader, especially when John Kerry, who was Secretary of State, admitted that much of that money that we sent to Iran would actually be used by Hamas that would then be targeting U.S. interests.
Sure.
So, sure, go ahead.
I would just like to respond to that. So I would say that my criticism of somebody's North Korea policy is I'm not like a radical one way or the other, right? I'm not like, let's give North Korea everything they want and let's all be happy and dandy. And my other position isn't, and I'm going to be debating somebody next week on this, whether we should nuke North Korea. I'm going to be debating somebody next week who legitimately thinks we should drop a nuclear weapon on North Korea. He's a neoconservative type, big George Bush fan. So... yeah. My problem with him isn't the fact that he took a risk to sit down with him. I am willing to look at anybody who's willing to do that. I think we should. My thing is, if we do that, we need to make sure that we acknowledge we're taking a risk here by giving him legitimacy, number one, and we acknowledge that if we put anything down to sit down and have the discussion, which was the suspension of military drills, which is very important for South Korea's military preparedness if there was to be a conflict, that we're going to get concessions. There was really no concessions given, and the eventual offer from the Trump administration, and I'm going to kind of dumb it down a little because it's a little complicated, but almost amounted to, I'll put a McDonald's on every street corner, economic investments, baby, and the trade was, give us all your nukes, which that was a non-starter. That was something the North Koreans were never going to accept. So my problem wasn't that he talked to them, is that he talked to them, kind of wasted the opportunity and gave up things that I didn't think he should have gave up. When in comparison to Iran, which you brought up, which is you'll be like, well, we talked to them and legitimized the Iranian regime. My response there is I am willing to recognize the government as legitimate if we can get a deal that I find satisfactory and we can, take a risk that is well calculated. And I think the secret negotiations, which were in Yemen, since they were secret, that kind of reduced the idea of giving them legitimacy. And I think that what we got out of the Iran deal was benefactory to the security of the Middle East by preventing them from getting a nuclear weapon. I believe when it comes to the nuclear arms inspectors, I think the rules are stringent enough. I think the time period and the period for renewal that we'd be able to do was stringent enough. And I think that when it comes to the idea that some of that money would be used for terror, of course, any deal we would make with North Korea, that money could go to a nuclear weapons program that they do in secret. We take risks with this. And Obama openly acknowledged that some of that money, which was some was awarded in an international court due to a fighter jet program. The other was frozen assets, which was Iranian money. We acknowledged that some of that might go to Hamas. But Obama also took on the strategic burden of saying, if that money goes to Hamas, we will continue to engage with them in the proxy conflicts necessary. But we believe that the security threat of a nuclear Iran is large enough. And I agreed with that security assessment.
Well, I just don't see, I understand the idea and relying on the fact that the inspectors would be able to develop, to find some sort of nuclear program, but I don't believe that a nation that's willing to take your money and at the same time admit, or that you basically acknowledge they're going to then be taking that money to attack you, that they're going to operate in good faith. And I don't see any evidence that these inspectors are going to be so foolproof if this country is hell-bent on being antagonistic towards the United States and their interests, that they'll be able to prevent them from escalating their arms in such a way. When it comes to North Korea, I guess my question just specifically with that, and I honestly don't know the answer to this, so I'll take your word for this until I would research it more. Is South Korea, does South Korea and the people of South Korea right now feel more endangered after 4 years of Donald Trump than they did at the end of Barack Obama's term?
I'll put it this way. Barack Obama has a much higher approval rating among the South Korean population, a much higher approval rating. And when you actually look at Donald Trump's approval rating in South Korea, it's one of the lowest it's ever been. I would also say that when it came to Trump's cost-cutting measures and other things that he tried to push to strategic changes in South Korea, it had wide disagreement among the South Korean populace when you look at any like government-approved polling data. So this isn't just like this like rinky-dink pollster, but this is data that the government uses to figure out what their populace believe in. And when it specifically comes to the relationship between South Korea and America, South Korea widely believes that American troops need to be in Korea for their defense. They widely support America when you look at polling data. Yet, when it comes to specifically to Donald Trump, it seems that they do not have a very high regard for the man, and they had a much higher regard for President Obama.
But that doesn't necessarily translate into are they safer? For example, most people find Obama to be a likable guy, and many people, particularly around the world, because Donald Trump advocates an America First policy, many of our allies actually are less inclined to like Donald Trump because they would rather have a president that they think is looking at them as more of a team, as instead of America First. They want someone that's like, oh, I'm looking out for the UK and South Korea. So I don't know that just the popularity of the two men speaks to the relative safety of South Korea. But maybe if I change the question to be something like this, let's assume Donald Trump loses the election. Mm-hmm. In your estimation, is the situation at the end of Donald Trump's term then with North Korea worse than the situation with North Korea at the end of Obama's administration?
It's a hard thing to analyze. I mean, that's a hard question. You're going to have to give me a second, because they just released the new images of the new larger nuclear weapon that like Intel analysts had to spend their weekend doing that instead of spending time with family. I know a few of them, and they were so pissed that they did it then. You're like, oh great, now I have to spend my weekend looking at this dumb big missile instead of going home and eating family with food with family. I would just put it this way, that a lot of the bodacious rhetoric of the North has a lot of it was similar under Obama, and it's very hard to gauge whether the North Koreans are going to be more bombastic or not. But I will say that the relations between the United States and North Korea have definitely degraded, and the relationship between South Korea and North Korea after the South Korean president's work has also degraded to the point where the liaison office that was opened in 2018 between the two states was recently blown up on North Korean national television. So it's hard for me to gauge exactly, and I don't want to, and I'd rather say I don't know than lie and say I do.
Okay. By the way, just a quick note here. How long do I have you for? If you need to run soon, I don't have a problem whatsoever.
I'm wide awake. I slept very late. Just to make sure I could get to this.
Okay, so I don't have another guest lined up until General Spalding. You will be preceded by a general. General Spalding is going to come on and talk to us about China at 5 a.m.
I have questions.
Sure, go ahead, Carlos.
Okay. So, Dylan, there's two of us and there's one of you. So yep. I'm not gonna debate you. I'm very interested in your opinion on certain things, and I wrote a couple of notes.
Sure.
So I'm the guy that says Dylan and Rob and Carlos are the 1%, in the sense that we could talk and consume politics all day. Okay. Mm-hmm. The average American, no matter what stripe, mm-hmm. has one, maybe two things. Okay. And when I say two things, one of the things that we asked, did you watch any of the stream today?
I streamed my own election coverage, but I was able to watch some of Tiberius's presence here.
Okay.
And I heard you had 4 congressmen on, so I'm very happy for you guys.
So part of the shtick of getting everybody in a 15-minute time frame was, one of the questions that I asked was, what is your number one political issue? Okay. So no problem. Go ahead, Rob. And so Carlos's number one political issue is the military.
Yeah.
Veterans. You know why, Dylan? They don't have lobbyists. And my son was a scout sniper in the Marine Corps. My father, who was born in Venezuela, was educated in the United States, went to VMI and the Florida Military Institute, then graduated there, went to the University of Texas, and then went back to Venezuela and did 35 years in the diplomatic corps. At 4 years old, he sent me here to the United States to live with my mom's sister. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's how I ended up here. So number one is veterans. and number two is foreign policy. So I'm very interested in what you have to say.
Wonderful.
So I agree with you with the Syrian Kurds thing. And I don't want to keep you here the whole night. Could you give me your very best 2-minute wrap up on the 30,000 foot analysis of what happened? I'm not so much interested in what he did wrong or right, the president, but just give us an analysis of what actually happened so we have a foundation to people, the regular voter, to understand what the hell happened.
Yeah. So, basically, as many people know, there was this little well-known indie group called ISIS that did some stuff in Syria, and it was not very good. There was also other organizations. There was the FSA, which is the Free Syrian Army. There was, of course, the Syrian National Army, which was the government of Bashar al-Assad, Russia's involvement. There was a lot of, basically, a civil war was occurring. And there was ISIS, of course, and ISIS was making very strong ground against a bunch of Kurdish militias in northeastern Syria, and they've gotten to the city called Kobane. And at Kobane, we basically we went to the Kurds, and also the Iranians, and specifically Soleimani went to the Kurds, and we both gave them a pitch. And the Iranians said, "We'll help you," and we said, "We'll help you." And the Kurds decided to take American assistance over Iranian assistance because they were afraid the Iranians would betray them, because Iran has a large Kurdish population, a lot of Kurds who protest in their country that they mow down, and they're not very positive looking upon Kurdish independence, which
Right.
the idea of Kurds having guns scares them, unless they're, of course, the political party they back in, the KRG in Iraq. So basically we ally with them, and we do airstrikes, and due to the operation was named Operation Inherent Resolve, and pairing with the northeastern Kurds, a bunch of Arab militias, the SDF, YPJ, YPG, they were able to push back, losing over 12,000 people, 12,000 brave men and women who fought back and beat back ISIS, city to city, block to block, defended their homes against that. They were able to defeat ISIS, and they did some of the most brutal fighting of the Syrian civil war. And it was under the guarantee of American support. And they trusted us because we have usually been somewhat the ally of the Kurds, even if sometimes we have betrayed them again under Bush, for example, when we look at the Gulf War and what happened under the genocide against the Kurds that Saddam committed. But that was in Iraq. So after the operation ends, they basically control most of northeastern Syria. But Erdogan, which is the leader of Turkey, was not a big fan of this. It's very complicated, but they basically believe that the Kurds in northeastern Syria, specifically the YPG, which is one of the militias under the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, is basically the Syrian branch of the PKK, which they consider a terror group. So, even though I would completely say that is incorrect from a historical point of view, but that's Erdogan. He's an authoritarian. He's going to do he's arresting Kurdish politicians daily, HDP party members, so he doesn't really care about the truth. Right. And Obama was basically able to balance our relationship with a NATO member, Turkey, and our relationship with the Kurds in Syria very, very steadily. And it was very hard for him to keep the Turkish army back, but he was able to do it with a small contingent of forces between the border, because Turkey was not going to just fire upon U.S. troops, blow through them, because again, we're a NATO ally. They didn't want to do that. That would be disastrous for them. And so we were able to keep them safe. Trump gets into office, and he was the one who finished Obama's Operation Inherent Resolve. After that operation was finished, he threatens to pull out at one point. And there's a ton of resignations. His own party rejects him. The Democrats reject him. It's bipartisan rejected. I was extremely scared. Thankfully, he turned back on that. Months later, he reversed that decision and decided he was going to pull troops to bring them home. Those troops were then taken out of Syria and then moved to to Iraq. They would never come home. They would move to Iraq and eventually back into Syria later. But before that was done, there was negotiations to destroy the SDF's defenses on the border with Turkey to make Turkey feel safe. So not only did we take our troops out, we said, put down your guns, don't worry, take out your heavy weapons on the border with Turkey. They're not going to do anything. We guarantee we'll be there for you. And right when they finished demolishing those defenses, that's when we left. So not only did we backstab them, we took away their means of defense. And he pulled out for, the populist messaging of bringing the troops home. We got to bring them home. These wars have been going on forever. But then he reverses it and deploys them in a different part of Syria, and he says, to protect the oil fields. and because Turkey had to clean out the area, which was, I don't think he was referring to ethnic cleansing, but it was also a very just bad way that Trump phrased it, that Turkey had to clean out the area, and these were our allies. And so hundreds of thousands of people were displaced, thousands of Kurds were killed, and one of the most brutal instances of the war, I mean, there's a lot of war crimes. I have over 150 documented war crimes I could show you. But one of the most brutal instances is when a Kurdish politician who was a friend of the United States was dragged out of a car by a Turkish-backed group, beaten, a female politician, then thrown on the ground and shot by our so-called allies in Turkey, by our so-called humanitarian saviors of Syria. And that is what I would think was one of the worst moments of treachery in modern American history, and that is something that I had a deep emotional investment in, and that's something that has made me decide I can never vote for Trump.
So let me ask this just to clarify, and again, let me be honest. Even if we come to a disagreement on this issue, I'm fully acknowledging that you know more of the specifics of the situation. So I'm asking this in good faith. So my question is, what I'm slightly confused on is, what is the nature of I'm not really there's a lot of names of the specific organizations, but with the Kurds that are our allies there, they are our allies and they're fighting ISIS. Does that mean that they were also aligned with Assad, these Kurds?
No, they were not aligned with Assad. They specifically did not like Assad because Assad has never been particularly friendly towards the Kurdish population. And so not to mention the fact that when ISIS came running, Assad's army left. They abandoned them. They went to the coastline to defend the main capital area. And so they were looking around for allies, and, a lot of people offered it up, but they took us because they trusted us. But no, they're not friends with Assad. And currently, Assad is rejecting them in the idea that, hey, do you want to negotiate with us? And he's now saying, no, since now you're in a weaker position, we don't even want you at the negotiating table.
Yeah, it's like an anti-risk game.
So there's basically three major groups then that were disparate in the Syrian conflict. You had ISIS, and that's fighting Assad, and then you have the Kurds that are fighting ISIS, and they're not necessarily fighting Assad, but they're not allied with Assad. Is that, I know that's probably a gross oversimplification, but is that in general?
I would say there's a lot of foreign actors involved in a lot. I would just add one more, and that would be the FSA, which is the Free Syrian Army, which they split off into a lot of different splinter groups and different things, but now a lot of that is like Turkish-backed militias, because a lot of that's fallen apart under Assad's onslaught in Idlib and Aleppo. Where is Aleppo? Well, it's now in Assad's control.
Yeah. And now the Free Syrian Army, now perhaps this is misinformation that I had, but I haven't read the specifics of this in a while. Wasn't there accusations, we'll just put it that way, and you could tell me if you believe those are true or not, that we were arming the Free Syrian Army, and there were groups such as Al-Nusra that were part of those groups?
So we had a operation called Timber Sycamore, which was a CIA operation to basically funnel munitions to the FSA, and we kind of hand chose what organizations we were going to give weapons to, and we were this is a lot of where the accusations that we funded ISIS came from, like the idea that Obama funded ISIS. That's completely inaccurate. What happened was, once we gave weapons to a lot of these groups, since it's a civil war, a lot of the weapons started trading hands and eventually landed up in the hands of organizations like ISIS because it's a civil war. I mean, if you look at the Spanish Civil War, I'm pretty sure some Soviet guns eventually landed in the hands of Francisco Franco, because that's just how civil wars are. They're hectic. Their cities change hands all the time. So doing any CIA op in these certain areas can lead to eventually these weapons trading hands. I'm sure when we airdropped weapons into France for French resistance, a few Germans found one of those crates and picked them up, but that doesn't mean we funded Nazi Germany. That just means that some of the weapons eventually landed in their hands.
But okay, I understand that answer, but let me ask this. Hasn't our CIA had a rich history of backing rebel forces that end up then winning, that end up then becoming an excuse for us to invade that country 18 years later? Isn't that like kind of what we saw with, overthrowing the Shah in Iran, installing Castro in Cuba, and like now we're seeing the fruits of our labors in Libya, where we backed extremists that Gaddafi was telling us, these are Islamic extremists that you're backing. So what was our guarantee that by getting involved in this conflict in the first place, that we wouldn't have ended up just installing another regime that ended up being antithetical to U.S. interest?
I would say that when we talk about guarantees in foreign policy, they never truly exist. We can look at incentives, right? Like someone is incentivized to not do something. For example, when we were working with the SDF, they're very incentivized not to backstab us, because if they do, they lose their support. So most logical conclusions would come to the idea that they're not going to betray us because it would be against their interests. Then again, that also assumes rational actors, and in foreign policy, since we're human beings, there's a lot of times not very rational actors, and a lot of times what'll happen is, for example, one of the best examples is the Mujahideen. This is one of the best examples that people like to point to, is that eventually the Mujahideen, some of the forces that the Mujahideen turned into Al Qaeda, the Taliban, and they killed us, and they 9/11. So we funded 9/11, and that's. I think a lot of times when you look at these historically, that number one, a lot of these things I wouldn't have backed groups. For example, I wouldn't have backed the the Contras. I would never have backed the Contras. Right. They were brutal murderers, even in the context of the Cold War. Even though a lot of the idea was we can back evil organizations, because the idea is if we don't do this bad thing here, the Soviets will win and they'll do the worst thing. So we have to do the bad thing to stop the worst thing imaginable. Vietnam was a lot of that example. We backed Vietnamese dictators because, well, Ho Chi Minh is so much worse than that, because then communism could fall over all of Asia. Or
isn't that the example though that you're talking about in Syria with the Kurds? Because the bad thing is Iran, right? I'm not saying. Hey, listen, I feel the same way about the Kurds. Mm-hmm. Okay, we should have never betrayed them.
Right there, there's the flag, Syrian Democratic Forces.
Right. Yeah. So the bad thing, right, is Iran. It's a question, not a judgment.
Yeah. So the analysis here when it comes to the SDF was that we backed them because the real bad thing was like ISIS. Operation Inherent Resolve was ISIS was bad, but also that a Syria completely only aligned with Bashar al-Assad, who is aligned with Hezbollah. Hezbollah sent troops to back Bashar al-Assad, right? Soleimani and his replacement currently actually also organized militias that ended up executing children in Syria. So they've obviously done some not very friendly things, and Assad also has a better relationship with Iran, and Iran has been very supportive of the Syrian government. So the idea is that it's twofold. We wanted to use Operation Inherent Resolve to destroy ISIS, number one, and number two, it would give us a foothold in northeastern Syria and another dedicated ally. That would mean that Assad would either have to come to the negotiating table with us somewhat disadvantaged, or that, of course, that maybe one day the SDF, and this was a pipe dream, would take over all of Syria and turn Democrat. I was more in the camp of negotiate. Get the foothold, negotiate with them, maybe create something like the KRG, which is the Kurdistan Regional Government in Iraq. That was something I was more in favor of.
See, but this is where I think I'm going to differ with you, because I think that we've seen foreign policy blunder after blunder in the past 40 years where we came up with some reason that said, no, we need to have a foothold in this country. And by getting involved in those quagmires, whether it be intentionally or through a series of unforeseen events, we end up then having excuses for why we have to keep troops and why we have to be involved in those conflicts for decades. We see the same in Afghanistan. And so I think that there becomes a danger when we say, well, look, here's this country and we don't like what they're doing, so now we need a military foothold there so that we can force some sort of negotiation. And it seems to backfire more often than not, which ends up causing all sorts of U.S. troops deaths and increased deaths in the area. Now, I won't disagree with you. It seems as if, I'm taking your word, that we left in a very ham-handed and a way that I think was very
in an ignoble way. Yeah,
right, an ignoble way. That's a good way to put it. But the idea that we should have been there in the first place is something that I criticize.
So I would say that I worked on the Microvell campaign, so nobody can say, Dylan, you're a war hawk and you just want to invade every country, right? Nobody can say that. I got Bernie Sanders above my head, right? I mean, you can't exactly say that I was like I would have championed the Iraq War, for example. I think the Iraq War was a mistake. I think the way I would agree with many Barbara Lee's criticisms of the Afghanistan War, who was the one person who voted against it. I think after going through the Afghanistan papers, the Afghanistan War has been done in a butcherous, dumb manner, which I have not been agreeing with at all. And I think we've wasted so much money in Afghanistan to the point that it's created not a democracy, but a kleptocracy as well.
Right. Dylan, how much? How much money have we spent? You know,
I'd have to go back, but I remember
just ballpark.
I remember reading that we spent the equivalent of $150 million in about the size of a normal U.S. county for every U.S. and the size of a U.S. county in Afghanistan every day. So, like, if you were to take what your county is and place it in the middle of Afghanistan, that place $150 million every day. That's what I remember from the Afghanistan papers. I might be off, but that's what my mind's saying.
Let me ask you this. I legitimately don't know this. Has Joe Biden taken a stance on Donald Trump saying he wants to pull troops back from Afghanistan?
He hasn't taken. Well, can I answer your question?
Yes.
Before?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I jumped. Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree with you that we need to be extremely critical when we go to war, but that doesn't mean that we should be hold ourselves back in situations where I feel it is a moral right thing to do or a strategically beneficial thing to do. For example, I don't think any American would ever say that South Korea is a failure. It is a nation that is economically prosperous. It is a democracy, and it was, I would believe, one of America's best successes in Korea. And hey, Kitty, how's it going? I would say that even though a lot of bad things had to happen with the South Korean dictatorship and the war, and I would think I would make a lot of decisions better. No Gunri was a disaster, a humanitarian disaster, but I would say that it's a success. Japan would be another modern American success story, even though we occupied that country for a very long period of time. I would point to, of course, one of the better examples, one that I didn't want to bring it up, but Germany would be another example. So there are examples of this working. Now, I thought that we did the impossible and we made northeastern Syria one of those successes, because what we did there is we didn't say we're going to deploy millions of American troops, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We said, you know what, we're going to provide support on the ground for the people who want it. They want our support, they're asking for support, we'll provide them support, we'll give them weapons, we'll give them munitions, we'll give them support. They have, out of all the parties in the Syrian civil war, they are the most humane. They're not perfect, but they're the most humane. We're picking the best option, and it's to fight a force which is also our strategic enemy, ISIS, an organization that goes into our nightclubs and shoots up our people, that we have a very good strategic interest in disabling. And up to that pullout, I considered a strategic success, and we did that strategic success while balancing our relationship with Turkey, and that's why I considered Operation Inherent Resolve to be one of Obama's greatest achievements. And the ending of it, I was actually going to say, during the early Trump term, if Trump continued it, would have been one of his greatest achievements in my mind as well. And the fact that he pulled away from it later, I think it was more just a reach for populism or what's popular compared to what's right and what's the best thing for the future.
Question.
Go ahead, Carlos, if you...
Real quick. What's the calculus with respect to what the president, what 45 was thinking about at that same time with respect to Iran and the wild card, Russia?
That's the thing that confuses me the most, is because it made no strategic sense whatsoever with his maximum pressure policy. His policy of maximum pressure is basically the idea that we can't negotiate with Iran unless they completely give up the nuclear plan and agree to all of these demands that they're not going to agree with in the current government. We can't negotiate with them. We need to apply maximum economic pressure, maximum military pressure, and as we saw from the Soleimani killing, they're willing to go pretty far. As we saw from his announcement about after the drone was shot down, he was willing to strike within Iran. He advocated, and the Pentagon eventually distanced themselves from these statements, to bomb Iranian cultural sites, which is a war crime. That's against not only international law, it's also against American law as well. So his pressure, he was obviously not very friendly to the Iranian government. The SDF specifically chose to work with us over Soleimani. They were gaining leverage over one of Iran's strongest allies, the ally which they got Hezbollah to go help, which the deputy commander of the Quds Force, I forget his name, but he's now the leader of the Quds Force now, organized militias to go fight there from Afghanistan and from Pakistan. It was like over 12,000 people they sent from Afghanistan and Pakistan combined, so much that they had to split it into two separate organizations, just one for Afghanistan and one for Pakistan. They sent so much support over there, and we had gained leverage in the northeast of the country. And so for me, that's why I always thought that operation was bipartisan. It was where the Democrats had a reason to support it because they thought it was a best way to advocate for the people who lived there. It was the most moral force, and that it was good to negotiate. And the Republicans wanted it because I would think of the strategic stronghold against Iran. So it was bipartisan, and that's why when Trump pulled out, Lindsey Graham was against it. So was Mitch McConnell. his own party was looking at him like he was insane. And that's the thing that gets me, is it doesn't make sense to me. And that's what scares me a lot about Trump when it comes to his foreign policy, is a lot of it doesn't make sense. But then there's one instance in Trump's foreign policy which I think enlightened me to why I think he did it. He was in northern Iraq in the KRG region, and he was speaking to the leader of the KRG, which is the Kurdistan Regional Government of Iraq. And he was thanking them for things they never did. And I was sitting there very confused. Why is he thanking? They never did this. They never did that either. And eventually what I realized is he's thanking him for stuff that the Kurds in Syria did. He doesn't know the difference between the Kurds in the government in Iraq with the KRG and the Kurds in Syria with the SDF, YPG, YPJ. He doesn't know the difference. Yet he made a decision that affected all these people in northeastern Syria, but he didn't even know the difference between the Kurds there and in Iraq. And so I just had to think that I think it was from a lack of expertise and a lack of knowledge. That's the only thing that really makes mind. And I think that combined with the general idea of bringing the troops home, right? Like, that's a popular thing to do, but he never even brought them home. He just deployed them in Iraq.
Well, so let me say this, and I think that a lot of these decisions, for a very similar reason what you just said, are ham-handed, and I think it's because I was enlightened and thought that this was a good comment, and I'm assuming you'll disagree, in the second debate that Trump had with Hillary Clinton, where we were assured, the entire establishment, Republican and Democrat, was worried that Trump signaled overtures to Assad and to Russia in an effort to collaborate with them to fight against ISIS. And so in the VP debate, we saw Pence and Kaine. Pence was assured America, oh, no, we realize the dangers of Assad. We would never do that. And everyone, finally, you saw MSNBC and Fox applaud, say, yes, that's presidential. That's what we want. Then in the second debate, Trump came out and was like, I don't understand why we're not working with Assad to fight ISIS. And so I think that his gut feeling, and I don't think this gut feeling's wrong, even if it was done in a ham-handed, non-logistical way, was that why, if our greatest enemy is ISIS, that requires the stripping of our rights, of our Fourth Amendment rights, because Islamic terrorists is such a danger, why are we advocating for forces that stand against the country, the leadership of the country that's fighting ISIS? And I think that ultimately the rhetoric we've seen from the Democrats since, including from Hillary Clinton, that suggested a no-fly zone over Syria, seemed to suggest an aggressive posture towards Russia that I think would have been incredibly dangerous to have a strong foothold in Syria, setting up an aggressive posture against Russia, a nuclear-armed superpower.
So, I would say that now Partisan Girl would disagree with me, who's somebody who has me blocked on Twitter, but she's also somebody who's been on David Duke's podcast. So she didn't like that I brought that up. So.
What's her reason for that? She just didn't know who he was?
She went on to it to advocate for Assad on multiple occasions about how great Assad was. I'm not a huge fan of her. She also blamed the Lebanon explosion on Israel because, the Jews just everything. These how these type of people. Who would have thought, a friend with David Duke? But
she's a disaster on Twitter.
Yeah, she's terrible.
I mean, she's not.
I don't know her.
She's not you, dude. Not even close.
So. The thing is, for me, I would say the SDF was the best force in fighting ISIS. More effective with Assad, who was more busy fighting the FSA, the Free Syrian Army. They also fought ISIS, but when they took more territory from ISIS, but when you look at the territory they took, it's vast expanses of desert, right? Like if I said I captured 20 miles of Arizonan territory, you'd be like, wow. But if I said I captured half of New York City,
right, like I get you.
One is a lot more strategically important and a lot more difficult to capture. And when you look at the territory the SDF captured, I would say that. And I would also bring up this: the invasion of northeastern Syria and the betrayal of the Kurds was the biggest possible gift to ISIS Trump could have done. Anti-ISIS operations in northeastern Syria decreased by 75%. 75%. And they started assassinating tribal leaders again. They started spreading propaganda again. So they started mobilizing again. They were advocating against these policies of kind of women's liberation that were being done in northeastern Syria, which I'm a huge supporter of. And the the camps where they hold like the wives of ISIS fighters, the former wives of ISIS fighters, the riots increased, the amount of rioting they were doing and like stabbing people who might work with the SDF. But the big thing that scared me was the huge amount of escapes from SDF prisons of ISIS fighters, and particularly foreign ISIS fighters. These are people who went halfway across the world to kill and slaughter and enslave, and they are escaping from prison. And the reason why was because since the SDF was being invaded, they basically would call prison guards up and say, hey, we're short troops. I know this sucks, but we have to use some of our prison guards and send them to the front. And they would. And then they would escape because there's less prison guards. And not only that, but many of Turkey's bombs would literally hit the prisons or hit near the prisons, causing chaos, allow more to escape. So if your main thing is, well, we work with Assad to beat ISIS, my counter would be the SDF was more effective in combating ISIS, and by us betraying them.
Just real quick on that point, were they more effective before the U.S. was backing them, or after the U.S. backed them?
I would say that since they were the one holding them back in northeastern Syria, I would say then it would have been more debatable. But after we gave them the support, we did that because they were the force that were holding them back from Kobane, and we needed to start pushing them in that direction. So I don't see, I would advocate working with everybody to fight ISIS. But I think out of all of our options, even though I think we should also work with other people to fight ISIS, they were the best option to fight ISIS, number one. But I would also point to, the fact they just brought up is that these escapes from prisons, those are fighters back out there, back doing attacks, and those reductions in anti-ISIS operations mean that we're removing the pressure that was going to be the final, like, going to help be one of the final nails in the coffin for ISIS in Syria. And sadly, that will no longer be the case. And their operations have increased by, I think last time I checked when I was reading information for the Rojava Information Center, by about 33%.
Well, so let me. So I still, and I don't disagree with any of that, but I still don't know how that answers the fact of the aggressive posture towards one of Russia's strategic allies in Assad and being stationed so close to Russia. Then, so to me, I look at it as analogous as, what would the United States say if Russia all of a sudden was like, we're going to back a group of people that is against the Mexican government, but we're backing them because they fight the drug cartels in Mexico.
Well, they do this though. They do this.
What's that?
They do this.
Russia does?
Yeah, one of the best examples would be Ukraine, where Ukraine is an ally, was a nation that turned more towards the West, and so in response they invaded Crimea and have backed organization in the Donetsk region that are trying to perform separatist actions. That would be one of the, now the counter would be, but Ukraine's so close to Russia, it's strategically important to them. Yes, but Ukraine's government then started turning towards the West, and once it did that, it obviously became an issue. Oh, here's another example: Latvia, Lithuania. These are nations, and Estonia are nations that are important to NATO. These are free nations who are democracies, have constantly felt a threat by Russia's actions, strategic positioning on the border. And I mean, I would say that there are examples, most certainly examples I can point to where Russia has done things that are similar to this. But again, I would say that, and here's my peace branch, that I'm not against working with Assad possibly, or Russia possibly, to find a peace deal to the Syrian arrangement. But we removed all of the leverage that could have gotten the Kurds the freedom that they wanted and the future that they wanted. And that's something that it's just hard for me to forgive Trump for.
Because can't find a reason as to why he did it.
Exactly.
A logical reason.
And even if there was a logical reason, most likely disagree with it, but at least I'd like to know why, and I just can't seem to find a decent reason.
I agree with you.
Other than lack of knowledge.
Right, and I do agree that there needs to be more transparency when it comes to these foreign policy decisions, though I would default towards bringing troops home as a default if I didn't have transparency, as opposed to placing or keeping troops somewhere if I didn't have transparency. And again, I think the difference is, I understand the situations you're saying, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, and those type of situations, but those were considered by many foreign policy experts in the United States, if not the establishment political powers, as very aggressive postures that were antithetical to the interests of the United States. However, I think if it was so close to the United, I'm not looking at Ukraine as close to Russia as so much that the importance that I'm criticizing. I'm looking at us being in Syria as being close to Russia. So if Russian troops were stationed so close to the United States and Mexico, I think that politicians in the United States, particularly the establishment foreign policy people that we consider credible, would consider that very much a hostile act of war that would raise tensions incredibly. And again, that's very dangerous when you're talking about nuclear superpowers. And this isn't happening in a vacuum, right? Because remember, Hillary Clinton's talking about no-fly zones over Syria. There's all sorts of stuff that's going on in the Ukraine that was already seen as aggressive posturing towards Russia with Poroshenko and what we were doing with that administration. So, I mean, to me, it seems to me like I have questions with the establishment foreign policy that's so aggressive towards Russia, making excuses, although I completely take your word that for a noble people and helping a noble people out that we incredibly let down in a terrible way. But the fact that we sent those people, I guess the argument I'm making is this. Even if we say what Donald Trump did was bad there, which I still would need to research more, I have no proof that what would have happened had it been Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden would have been worse, because it could have led us to a conflict with Russia.
So I would say that when it specifically comes to northeastern Syria, I don't see any realistic way it could have spiraled out to a conflict with Russia. When it comes to the big thing is when you talk about the no-fly zone. The no-fly zone was never proposed over northeastern Syria. What you're talking about was over Aleppo, over Idlib, over areas which are now mostly basically, well, not Aleppo, but Idlib is mostly, that's Turkey's business now. And Turkey has been a lot more aggressive than we have by 1,000,000%, where they've directly, I believe that there's been direct conflict between Turkish and Russian military apparatus. Direct conflict, like killing each other. And they haven't spiraled into a conflict. Where if you look at this flag behind me, you see that line in the middle of it, kind of like through Syria? That was basically their border with the rest of the government. But it was also a huge river. Meaning they had basically a kind of basic line between where they were, where the rest of Assad government were, and they'd have some scuffles on the border, but nothing large scale, nothing really big. There was certain instances where we did strike, but there was almost a essence of stability that could happen. But where you look at, because we all know power vacuums is extremely dangerous here, and I want to actually make the argument that when we pulled out of northeastern Syria, we actually increased the risk for American troops to be directly attacked and for us to have a confrontation with Russia. And we actually are currently having confrontations with Russia because of it. And here's why. When we pulled out of northeastern Syria, our troops were fired accidentally a few times, like kind of attacked by the Turkish government by accident, because they were trying to move in so aggressively because they didn't know if we'd reverse our decision, what they would do. But now we have Russia's doing patrols along this area with Turkey, and we're also doing patrols, which means our cars are regularly kind of meeting, and our troops are getting in yelling fights with Russian troops, and I've heard of a few instances where firefights have broken out. That never really happened until this, because we've created an area that's very tense, where there's now Turkish patrols, there's Russian patrols, and now there's American patrols, all in this small area, and Turkey's not friendly with the Syrian government, which also is friendly with Russia, and you can see the kind of confrontation we had there, where before it was a lot more strongly defined, and there was less of a power vacuum. But due to Turkey taking advantage of the power vacuum and moving in, and Russia actually having to jump in to kind of help the SDF against them, and us also still having a position with the SDF, it just created a huge mess. And I think, not to mention the breakouts from ISIS prison camps also added more chaos. And I would always say that the thing that is most likely to always lead to a confrontation between large states is more power vacuums and more chaos. And we had finally brought stability to the area, and that was reversed with the pullout.
But go ahead, Carlos.
What is the city that you were talking about that the Turks had?
Idlib.
And it's, that is
to the left, bottom leftward of Aleppo.
Oh, I see it. Got it.
Yeah.
So, but again, like, I don't know that there.
You can also see Kobane up there, by the way. If you look up, very kind of upwards tip of.
Yep, I see it right here.
That's where the Kurds did a very famous defense against ISIS.
Right.
So I don't see how, if we didn't get involved in the first place, how there would have been a power vacuum. It seems clear to me that without U.S. interference, that Assad would have maintained control of the region. Even if we don't like him, I don't think Assad was a danger to the United States. And it's clear that he was in conflict with ISIS, which we considered our enemy. And so when you say, yeah, I agree that maybe we should have worked with everyone who wanted to fight ISIS, in reality, that's not how it played out, though. And we can see that at least twice Trump, which I will blame Trump for this and considered it a low point in his presidency, presidency decided to bomb Syria and bomb the interest of Assad. I think that the reason that I bring this up, though, is when you talk about the foreign policy experts, even in Trump's team, and all of the people in a bipartisan way being against the pullout, those were the same sort of people that almost universally were advocating for the bombing of Assad. And so if this was really just about protecting the Kurds and helping them fight ISIS, why are these same people actively encouraging the bombing of Assad?
Well, I would also bring up the fact that there are reports coming out, which I might have been confirmed, I forget, it's been a while, that Trump considered literally removing Bashar al-Assad himself.
Assassinating him.
Assassinating him, which shows again, which in comparison to his decision would I guess be more evidence that he didn't really know what he was doing when it came to Syria. If he goes from, okay, let's assassinate him, okay, let's bomb him, actually, can we pull out, actually, redeploy in, because it's like this back and forth, and that also was against his policy of maximum pressure. And I think that chaos is the thing that I would think would make the tension. But I agree that by us being there, that would create tension with Russia. I agree. It could. And it most certainly, since we supported a side that was not their person, they're going to be angry about that. I think that at certain points in history, though, there is good reason to create tension between two states. That if to take a moral stance and to take a stance against their strategic enemies, working with their allies on the ground to battle that enemy, even if it makes some of our geopolitical rivals angry, sometimes is the beneficial and correct thing to do. And I was willing to take that escalation with tensions with Russia in the context that I thought this was one of the safest way to possibly do that when it comes to northeastern Syria, in comparison to being more involved in Idlib, which Turkey has now actually done. We stopped our support for Operation Timber Sycamore in 2017. The rest of it was just, okay, we're going to ride out the northeastern Syria, which I thought was the smartest thing to do. I thought it was good that Temper Sycamore was stopped when it was, because I thought the FSA was basically defuncting removing Assad or even putting pressure on Assad. And the best way was to now negotiate with the government after finding a decent, strong position with the SDF. But he did not take that approach.
But so my pushback on that would be this, because okay, even if we take that sometimes it's okay to increase tensions when it comes to nation states because that could result in some sort of compromise or some sort of negotiations that would be good. The problem I have is this: the same people that bipartisanly were putting it, we have to be able to trust then the people that are these foreign policy experts to say, oh, no, we wouldn't escalate, we wouldn't stay there for nefarious reasons and things like that. The problem is, in the bipartisan support of that action and the condemnation of pulling out, we see that exact same foreign policy class that advocated for the war in Iraq, advocated for the interventions in Libya, advocating for refusing to pull troops out of Afghanistan. So why would I trust these people that have been warmongers and sought to enrich the military-industrial complex, but this time they were actually being altruistic? It just seems incredibly, especially then when you consider they're advocating for the bombing of Assad. So it seems like, I'm not saying that Trump acted perfectly. I'm just saying, why would I trust these people that have been wrong so many times?
I would say never just trust somebody because they said something or trust somebody because they asked you to. I would say look at the people, the interests that are involved, look at the sides that are involved, look at what our interest in the situation is, look what we can do on the ground, look at the effectiveness of the operations on the ground before you make any decision. I would never throw something out because Rob told me, and Rob said that guns shouldn't be banned, but he also was a racist Trump supporter, so I'm not gonna do that. I would never do that, because even though I disagree with you on most issues, I just because you propose something to me and I disagree with a vast majority of your opinions, doesn't mean I'm just going to throw it out. So if somebody comes to you who's who is maybe like a Joe Biden who voted for the war in Iraq, for example, comes up to you and says that like, hey, I want to do this thing, which here is the reasons why it's good. And I think immediately you should be more skeptical. Maybe you could be more skeptical because like, this is the same person who did this thing I didn't like. But that doesn't mean you should just dismiss it, because then if anything, that becomes a kind of almost like Trump derangement syndrome, where you're just opposing it because the other side didn't like it, right?
I understand what you're saying, and I definitely do, and I think there's a lot of truth, and that does give me something to think about. But I would say that I would push back a little in saying this. It's not as if we're having just some discussion about a domestic policy or something. Mm-hmm. Anytime that we're advocating actually, I don't want to say murder, actually killing people, actually sending troops to kill people, I think the stakes are raised. Yeah. And so I think that when you see people that for nefarious reasons have led to the deaths of US troops and innocent people in countries around the world, and they're saying, but trust us this time, we need to kill some more people, I become very skeptical of that. And again, I think that if I could say my opinion of you, and I don't mean this as an insult, I think that you correctly identify how noble the Kurdish people were and the promises we made of them. I'm not so sure that the people that were advocating sending those troops there would have done so for the best interest of the Kurds. And I fear that eventually they would have been exploited in our efforts to be warmongers further in Syria against Assad and be more militaristic in a posture against Russia. And the reason I think that is, look, we know that the people that advocated that policy, particularly Obama and the foreign policy experts around him, they didn't get to see their plan through fruition because of Trump. And so we don't know how it would have ended up. And what I can see is historically, when they have had their way, it's ended up as a disaster.
So I would say that the thing is that a lot of times it isn't just that the military establishment supported this. It was also a lot of the normally anti-war left also supported this. A lot of libertarians also supported this. Basically, almost all around the spectrum, it was supportive of this. It was almost like it's like, well, I'm not going to support, fighting the Nazis because we're going to make the fucking excuse my French, the weapons manufacturers rich, right? Well, I mean, that's true that the military industrial complex might like it for different reasons, right? But that doesn't mean that you might not have a totally separate valid reason. Great example for me is I am not a libertarian. I'm going to be open about that. I'm not, right? But I want to stop our support, for example, the war in Yemen. And a libertarian might agree with me. Now, I want to stop it because I want to end the humanitarian slaughter. Their main concern might be somewhat about that, but also about the cost to American dollars, right? And so when you look at that, am I going to say, well, I'm not going to work with him because he's greedy? Right? He's greedy and he just wants to keep all the money to himself, and that's why. I would say no, even though I disagree with the reasons why he's involved, I still have my own different reasons which I think are valid for being involved, and so I'll work with him strategically. And so that's the point I would bring up here. I would also bring up the point that even though you can point to a lot of these more military industrial establishments as you supported this movement in northeastern Syria referred to as Rojava, so did vast amounts of people who are usually anti-war. I support them. A content creator you might know of called Vosh also supported them. Most anti-war lefties supported them. The congressional candidate I worked for, who didn't take a single money from corporate donors, also supported them. I think that this was something that was rightfully bipartisan.
But okay, but your situation, like your analogy with Yemen, I don't think it would be the analogy is quite as you put it. I think the analogy would be more appropriate like this. You support ending the conflict in Yemen, as does military people. Got that. I agree with you on that end. But instead of just saying, hey, Saudis, you need to stop bombing Yemen and we're going to aggressively posture to force you to stop the war in Yemen. Instead, we say, we're going to send boots on the ground in Yemen and force the Saudis to stop attacking them. But leave those boots there so we could aggressively posture Yemen into some sort of negotiation that benefits us. It's that idea that makes it ambiguous and makes me question, was this just about fighting ISIS? If so, why are we bombing Assad? Why didn't we just say, yeah, we'll defend the Kurds and Assad. We'll do everything we can to eliminate ISIS. Yeah. Why did we pick that very strategic thing to say, well, we're still going to posture against Assad? And to me, that's what makes it dubious. It wasn't just a moral action.
Because
Go ahead.
I think that not only was it good with fighting ISIS, but I also think it was good to support the Kurds and their ability to somewhat govern themselves. So, of course, when it comes to the specific relationship between that and Assad wants a strong central government where the Kurds don't get that type of sovereignty. We were more leaning towards the Kurds getting that type of central sovereignty. Not only was it morally correct because the Kurds should be able to govern themselves, and the Arabs of northeastern Syria should also be able to govern themselves. 60% of the SDF is actually Arab. But they should, not only is it beneficial because they can benefit themselves when it comes to them being able to rule themselves, but it also would weaken the central government because they wouldn't have authority over that region anymore, that region they were unable to protect. So there were different reasons why people are all supporting it, but just because we all have different reasons to supporting something and those reasons might be bad on their side doesn't mean we shouldn't support something. For example, let's say that we both had a bully that was very mean to both of us, or very mean to me. I had a bully, right? And I wanted to go beat him up because he was just beating me up every day, and I knew that at the end of the day, the only thing that's going to stop him is me punching him. And you had a different reason for wanting to beat this person up, right? Maybe it was a reason that I found a little bit less valid. Does that mean I should kneecap my ability to achieve this goal by not working with you? The question would be, and this is a valid question, is will their reason for doing it overpower my goal? And I didn't see that happening in northeastern Syria. The idea that it's now a militaristic state, we don't care about the Kurds anymore, we just care about beating Assad, and we're going to take away, we don't care about the democracy, that didn't happen. So that's why maybe you would have a reasoning there if we started just like, screw the Kurds, we don't care, we're in control now, deploy thousands upon thousands of troops. But we had like, it would have taken 150 troops max to keep the border between northeastern Syria and Turkey safe, and we deployed advisors and a few special ops. We didn't have massive amounts of troops in the region. We gave them the support, and we did it the way that I think we should engage in the Middle East when it comes to supporting our allies there. We didn't do this massive operation you're talking about in Yemen. In fact, the opportunity that they would have used to do it when we secured northeastern Syria, after we secured it, we didn't. We just continued our normal amount of support.
So
right.
do you
so
think...
I think the best argument you make there, which is something that's my side of the argument really needs to consider, is the fact that we're not talking about like hundreds of thousands of troops that were in Syria. We're talking like about 150. I actually think that's a very good argument because, right, then the cost of what we had there and the potential loss of life of American citizens is much lower than many people, myself, would have thought were how many there were.
I think we lost 3 American soldiers during the entirety of the destruction of ISIS. And let me tell you, ISIS lost a lot more than we did, but also the Kurds did. They lost 12,000. So when you think about the potential loss if we had to fight ISIS in a different way, that would have been so much more for America. But the Kurds took that burden for us, and then we backstabbed them, which is the thing that I can never get over.
Dylan, don't you think... I'm sorry, Rob. Don't you think... I'll be quick. Don't you think that the low numbers of American troops there and the that bright white light that the moth is attracted to, of claiming a populist victory by saying, I pulled the troops out, and a very low number of troops, do you think that the calculus for the president was like, no one's paying attention, no one cares, the average voter doesn't care, it's worth doing? You think that could have been a reason? I
think that election season seems to be, or getting elected seems to be the motivation for a lot of pork barrel politics for a lot of people. Like, hey, we don't really need more tanks in our county, but we're going to make sure that we get more contracts for tanks for these military manufacturers because we make tanks over here and it gets us more jobs. Does the nation need tanks? I think it might have been an example of him being able to say, I pulled out the troops, isn't that good? Everybody loves that, even though it wasn't the best thing to do in the situation. Because a lot of Americans just hear, pull out troops, that's good. Middle East has been chaos for a while, so it's cool that we're coming home, even if it isn't the best thing for us, the people in the region, and generally.
So, when did this happen exactly? Just...
this happened in, I think...
2019, right?
Very early 2019, like January. Yes.
Okay.
So let me just say that, like with your bully example, again, it's slightly different. It's not just that someone's bullying me and so you decide they're also bullying you, so you decide to take them out. It's you take them out and still aggressively posture me, which is slightly different. And the reason that this difference matters is because I think that what we see let me just put it this way. I will guarantee there were people in good faith arguing a position similar of yours to why we needed to install Castro and how good the Castro people were before he was leader of Cuba. And we said, this is someone that we need to install. These are noble, great people. They're fighting a good fight.
Not Castro. You're talking about Batista.
Well, we installed Castro, correct?
We had Batista. We had Batista kind of like we backed the Batista government, and Castro overthrew the Batista government, and then we did the Bay of Pigs and everything else.
Correct. Right.
Well, I thought initially, though, before Castro did that, I thought that Castro was someone that we were paying and our CIA would support.
No, we supported the opposition. His name was a dictator by the name of Batista, who was very brutal and very,
Right.
Okay, if that's true. So then we would use an example of like another country where we looked at people and we've said, like overthrowing the Shah in Iran, and we've said there would have been people that said, these are noble people that we're installing. We need to have them. What's that?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. No problem. And so I just think what I think oftentimes we see happen is even if you, and I do believe this, that you have good motivations, and I have no reason to disagree about the Kurdish people, I think that this is a long line of a precedent. I would have less of a problem with just saying, ISIS is our enemy. We will work with everyone in the area to fight ISIS, than to say ISIS is our enemy. Therefore, we'll back this group that is also antagonistic to the leaders of this country. And I think that oftentimes we see when we justify that meddling and say, well, these are good people. And so, yes, we want to eliminate ISIS and these are good people, so we want to defend them. We could say that to hundreds of groups of people around the globe. And so then this leads to another excuse to say, you could look at a group in the Congo, for example, and say, well, this group deserves to have a seat at the table, and there's kind of a bad regime that's running this, so perhaps the United States should get involved here. And then maybe we go over to, Pakistan or any number of other countries, and it seems like there's always an excuse that could be made. And I understand what you're saying. We shouldn't reject an idea just because the people that are promoting it have been wrong in the past. But at what point do we say they're very sophisticated, just like in Iraq, of being able to convince us, no, this time it's necessary. And so if we say, well, we're going to allow this situation to occur in Syria, that we've basically just given the excuse for this to happen everywhere around the globe.
So, by the way, for anybody who's curious, this is a YPG pen. It's I bought them in bulk. It's just I have a lot of the stuff, obviously.
That's cool.
So my main thing is I understand your concern that, like, for example, the Gulf War, the 1991 Gulf War, was an example of American military success, just blatantly. Even though, of course, there was mistakes that I could point to where like tragedies occurred, but widely it was American military success. We removed Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. We were able to push them out. We didn't keep going. We stopped. We secured the nation of Kuwait. We defended Saudi Arabia from being invaded, and we destroyed a lot more of their troops than our troops. It was a military success. And a lot of people going out into the 2004 Iraq War, 2003-2004 Iraq War, pointed to that and said, look how successful that was. We'll just do this. We'll just keep going, and then we win. And obviously that's bad. And my difference is I would say, hey, the difference for me is you need to go by a case-by-case basis, because some things could apply in one situation, not apply in another situation. For example, let's say that I went and I was going to buy a product from let's say I was going out and try to buy something from a website, and I go somewhere and I buy this beautiful crown, and I love it. It's great. It's beautiful. I look fabulous in it, right? But
Great.
Then I need the next thing, and I need this robe. And I go to a website, and it looks very shady. It looks very weird. The website doesn't really look secure. And it's like, well, I just bought something from a different website. I could just buy it. It's fine. It worked last time. I'll just do it now. The difference is, I would say that you would say, well, the situation here is different. The last website was Amazon. It's a lot more respectable. This is scamtakeyourwallet.com. I don't think that looks very nice. I think the price here is outrageous. I think this is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. So while the situation and the methods of purchase were great for that site, I think we should keep going and not do it in this situation. And that's what I would advocate here. That I think the Iraq War, for example, was a mistake, and I wouldn't apply the Gulf War thing for the Iraq War. And when it comes to us supporting in northeastern Syria, I would apply that there, but I wouldn't say apply it somewhere like Belarus right now. Even though the Belarusian dictatorship of Lukashenko is brutal, I don't think we should start sending guns to protesters, because that would just lead to a disaster.
Mm-hmm. Right, I agree.
So that, and I think this is a great discussion, but kind of tangentially to this. So, given all that we said, let's say that you view this as not just a strategic issue. Would it be fair to say you view this as a immoral issue for what Trump did by pulling out?
I think it was the most immoral thing he has done in office. Yes.
Okay, so how would you value? Let's take the strategicness out of it and just look at morality. Mm-hmm. In this situation, someone pulling out in the manner that Trump did and leaving our allies basically holding the bag and having danger, would you say that's basically a fair characterization, oversimplification?
Not only did we leave them having the bag, but we basically left them to slaughter. It wasn't just like we screwed over an ally. It led to the members of their government being dragged out of cars and shot. So it's not just like oopsie daisy. It's like you're dead now.
Okay,
but yes,
so
yes.
If we weigh that immorality versus the immorality of attacking a country without merit.
Okay.
Do you think those are analogous?
I think I know where we're going here, and I would love to have this conversation. So I would say that being somebody who supported a disastrous war could be something that would definitely dissuade me from wanting to vote for you.
So then, like, let's look at the situation particularly. I'm not even going to touch Iraq. Like, let's look at Libya,
Okay.
right? Because I think that that was a grotesque, immoral action that we
Yep.
saw from the Obama administration. So to me, is bad. I could at least come up with moral justifications, even if it was strategically wrong and it ends up being immoral. I could understand how someone could make a blunder operating on what they thought was good intentions and a moral objective of saying, I just want to stop an aggressive posture towards a nuclear superpower. But I can't really see any sort of moral justification for what we saw happen in Libya. So seeing
ask
as
you
how
a question?
Biden, yes, please.
So why did Trump support it?
Well, he wasn't in office. He wasn't one making decisions, but Joe Biden was.
Well, okay. Trump, you are familiar with the footage of Trump declaring his support for it, saying we need to go in, we need to strike.
Yes, and he did with Iraq
Yes.
it off and
he
on
also
as well.
he did that with Iraq as well. So my thing is, Trump went into office with this kind of thing of like, I'm going in because I'm not one of these career politicians. I'm gonna make decisions like a businessman. And while he was a businessman, making decisions like many of the rest of us would have as kind of civilians, he would have voted for the Iraq war. He would have been in support of that, and he would have been support in the invasion of Libya. Now, the Libya situation is actually very interesting because it's a very complex situation, which I don't have the time to go, and we're running on over like an hour now, which is much longer.
Yeah, and I want to let you go soon. Yeah, I definitely.
And I will say that there's a very interesting speech that Joe Biden made for the Center for Foreign Policy Research, SCTF4. I forget exactly the name of it, but he made a speech and he said that basically, he said, I was an opponent of the war in Libya in the administration. I didn't want to go in. I thought it was a bad idea. And I had to basically just like toe the line with the administration, but I was initially against it. And you pair that with, now it could be true that Joe Biden, he's a politician and he's lying. That could be true. Right?
No, but why did he say? What were his reasons?
His reasons was he didn't want to see a destabilization of Libya that could lead to something similar to Iraq because he saw the disaster of Iraq since he voted for it and wanted to recalculate his personal motives and basically say, after Iraq, I know the sacrifice of what comes with that type of decision.
Right.
But that he could be lying, which could be true. He could just be saying that for public opinion. He could, and I'll let's say I grant that. But I already know Trump's position was fervently in support of it. He in fact like said go in there, like he was very adamant about his support for it. So I think when it comes to Libya, I don't see that as a reason why I would vote for Trump, when Trump, as somebody who basically campaigned off the idea I'm not a politician, well then I got to look at his record of what he supported before he was in office, right? I mean, if I right now I'm a politician but I'm not elected. If right now I said I think we should abandon Israel and you were a pro-Israel person and then I ran for office, you would have to look at what I just said. You'd be like, well, he said here he abandoned Israel. Definitely if I was running off the idea that I'm not your normal politician, I'm just like you, I'm just a civilian, I'm a businessman. And well, while he was a businessman, he said he wanted to go in Libya. And so I don't really see that as a reason for me personally to not vote for
I think,
Donald Trump.
would you admit that there's a difference once you're in office and you have all sorts of access to intelligence and stuff that you wouldn't have as just a civilian, that could change your calculus? And despite the words that Trump said, it is true that he has not got us into a conflict like that, whereas Biden did. And I think you also should take into account like what seems to me to be historic Middle East peace deals that we see. So the big rub on Trump was supposed to be, this guy's a maniac, he'll get us into wars everywhere. And now it seems that the criticism is, well, he shuffled troops around and pulled out of certain areas.
I would say that. My thing is, I also like to weigh what somebody else would have done in a similar situation. For example, right?
That's right.
Like, for example, if Trump was in the same position as Biden was, and he would have done the same thing, and I know he would have done the same thing because he stated outwardly, let's do that thing, then it's hard for me to really say, well, I'm going to vote for Trump because he wouldn't have done that. But when I know he would have. In Libya, for example,
how do you know if he had access to different...
Well, the thing is, that's possible, but then I also, counterbalancing that, is the speech I have from Joe Biden saying he didn't even want to support it. And I would say that there could also be the counter of they had information that actually made intervention look even better than we thought it was publicly. They could maybe be like, hey, this information actually says Gaddafi's ready to fall like that and everything will be peaceful, and they could have that information behind closed doors and we didn't know. So I would say that would also go both ways. Now, when it comes to the peace deals, and then after this, I gotta go
Yeah,
because
we'll get
it's
you
almost
out, yeah.
4 a.m. and
You shouldn't stay up all night like me. Yeah.
so
Well,
The
please
king
go ahead and
needs some
finish.
sleep, right?
so yeah, I need some sleep for tomorrow.
Yeah, it's gonna be a long day.
I would say for the peace deals is the peace deals good. I can't deny that they're bad. I can't say. Here's another thing. I'll give Trump credit on another thing. He's been very supportive of Taiwan. I'm a huge supporter of Taiwan, so I'm very happy to see that support.
We are too.
For democracy. I would also point to the fact that the Obama-Biden administration started freedom of navigation operations. But I would say that when it comes to these peace deals, you got to acknowledge how we found ourselves in the situation that got us to peace deals. Jared Kushner had no real reason to be managing a Middle East peace plan. It is the most complicated thing in the world you're possibly going to find. Peace in the Middle East has almost become a joke with the idea that, yeah, you're going to get peace in the Middle East. And Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, was appointed to manage the Middle East peace plan, which I think seems almost, I would say, maybe I'll appeal to you guys, Hunter Biden-y. Maybe a little nepotism.
Nepotism, right?
Yes, I think it's very obvious nepotism. I don't think he has the experience to be in that position. Now, in his Middle East peace plan, widely until that peace deal was a failure. It was this he basically largely favored Israel. It was a non-starter with Palestine. Palestine widely rejected it. There was no way he was going to be able to find a consensus between Palestine and Israelis, and so they basically ended up backing the Israelis' annexation of territory, which is illegal under international law, right? Which is something that I don't think you should just unilaterally annex the Jordan Valley. I think that's bad. I think under international law we need to not be as favorable towards Netanyahu. I think we need to be able to know, like, if we're going to get a peace between this situation, we need to basically take a step back and let the Palestinians make a decent case for it. I think we need to go back to the way Clinton kind of tried to deal with the situation, even though that wasn't perfect either, than how Jared Kushner dealt with the situation. Now, out of the failure of Jared Kushner's ability to get peace between Palestinians and Israelis, the Israelis declared they were going to annex territory illegally under international law. And the UAE saw that and obviously didn't like that because they're supportive of the Palestinians. And so what they said is that if you don't break international law, we will open relations with you. Right? So basically, the bargaining chip that we ended up using between Israel and the UAE was the threat of Israel breaking international law, which to me doesn't seem good. That the idea that our bargaining chip will, well, if you don't open up with us, we'll just annex all these territory illegally. That sounds almost criminal on the world stage. And on top of that, when it comes to these peace deals, it's hard for me to really consider them peace deals because they're also between nations that were never at war with Israel. This isn't the Egypt-Israel peace deal. This isn't the return of the Sinai Peninsula. This isn't a peace deal between Jordan and Israel, who was also at war. It's Syria and Israel. It's a peace deal between the UAE and Israel, which has never been at war with Israel. Or maybe you could look at Qatar, which again, never at war with Israel. So while it is good for a security apparatus in the Middle East, it's not enough for me to really overlook all the rest of his blunders in foreign policy.
That's fair, and obviously we've gone long enough. But yeah, I really thank you, and I do really enjoy these foreign policy discussions. I'd be happy to carry on with you again on them, but we'll get you out of here. I know you're going to have a big day tomorrow. Are you going to have any election coverage tomorrow, and where can people find you?
You can find me at Dylan Burns TV on Twitch, which is DYLANBURNS TV, and on Twitter you can find me at Dylan Burns 1776, which is DYLANBURNS 1776. A real red-blooded American account.
So thank you so much. I'm appreciative that you came on, and I hope my audience I think that you're very intelligent in the foreign policy, and even if we would disagree on a lot of things, I think that I really enjoy talking to you. So thanks again for staying around so late, and get some sleep, and I'll try to check out your channel tomorrow with your coverage.
Awesome. And nice to meet you, Carlos. You have a blessed day, okay?
It's fantastic. Thank you very much for the information, and have a great day. I'm going to follow you on Twitter right now.
Thank you so much. You have a blessed day.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.